Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and the goal of today, we're going to introduce arrays, but the goal of today is to kind of get you to a place where you can kind of create a mini program where you can pass arguments to and get different results. So that way you can kind of create some practice, create some scripts where you play with your if statements and whatnot. But in order to do that, we need to learn how to work with arguments, and arguments come in the form of arrays. So let's first talk about what an array is. For that, I'm going to go back to here. We are going to want to create two files again. So we're going to create array args.js, and we're going to create array args.ts, because in the JavaScript file, we're going to learn how to do it with Node and how Node handles arguments. And then in the Deno file, we'll learn how Deno handles arguments, okay, to your code. But first, let's discuss what is an array. So let's go to Typescript, okay. And what an array is, it's a collection of values, okay. So it's several values. They could be like numbers, booleans, whatnot. Okay, but the idea is you want to have more than one value, a list of values in one sort of bucket. Okay, so it's essentially a collection of multiple values. There are different types of collections in every programming language of ways of having more than one thing in a variable. Generally, there's always going to be two categories. Okay, there's going to be your list of things, which in this case is an array, and then there's going to be your sort of dictionary values. So kind of like in a dictionary, you would look up a term and get a definition of that term. There'll be what's called a key, which is the sort of like the word that you're looking up, and then what that is, the definition. In JavaScript, that'll be called an object, which will be a bunch of key value pairs. But we'll do objects in a whole separate lesson. Really, all I care about right now is an array. So in TypeScript, okay, I'm going to create a variable. We're going to say const my array. And when you're working with arrays and objects, you're always going to use const. There's really very rarely a reason to use that with objects. And the reason being is that technically the container of the variables will never change. You might change the variables inside the container, but the container itself may not change. Which is because people always get confused, like, why can I change the values in an array if I declared it as a const? As you'll see in a moment. The reason is because what's constant is the array, the container. In the same way, like my house is still my house, it's still the same house if I change the couch inside the house. Okay, so the variable is holding the array. Not really, it's holding a reference to the array, but that's a conversation for another day. It's not holding the actual individual values in the array. Okay, so in this case, if I want to type an array, one way to type an array, and we'll see different ways you can type this along the way, I can use the word array. That tells me that I have an array, but it's going to want to know what type of array it's going to be. Like, is the array going to have numbers, booleans, a mix of things? So what we do is we're going to use this here in the diamond here. We'll write what's going to be inside the array. So we'll start off with an array of, in this case, an array of numbers. Okay, so this means that whatever I assign to this variable has to be an array of numbers. Okay, so square brackets means an array. So if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, TypeScript is happy because this is an array. Square brackets means an array. So whenever you see square brackets like that, that's going to mean an array. And then these are the different variables that are inside that array. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, if I try to add another variable, let's say 6 is a string, see, now it complains. Okay, string is not assignable to type number. But what if I did want this array to have numbers and strings? What I could do is I could use a pipe, which means or, and I could say or a number or a string. And so this means, hey, this is an array of numbers or strings. Okay, so this is where typing, again, is going to start getting a little bit more complicated if we want to, but I really just want an array of numbers. And generally, it's best to keep your arrays of like the same thing all the time. So here we have this array of numbers. Okay, wonderful. Okay, in JavaScript, again, no typing, so we would just take this out and we could just take any array and assign it to a variable. It's the only difference. The only difference between JavaScript and TypeScript is really going to be the typing. Okay, everything else is pretty much going to be the same because we just want the typing so we can catch those errors. But let's say I want to access, if I want to, I can console.log the array. So my array. And what if I want to console log just one number? If I just want to console.log one number in the array, the way you access items in the array is you put square brackets after the variable name, and then each of these values has a unique sort of address that you call it, generally based on a number, which is referred to as the index. The index always starts at 0. Okay, so technically the first item is at 0. So if I put 0 here, that's going to access the first item. Because the idea is that the index really represents how far removed from the beginning. So 1 is at the beginning, so it's 0 removed from the beginning. Then 1 removed from the beginning. Then 2 removed from the beginning would be the third item. It has to do with more what's going on under the hood with how arrays are allocated in memory. That's something you need to worry about right now, but just so you understand conceptually, why do we start with 0? And that's going to be pretty much the same in all programming languages. There's a few exceptions, but pretty much any programming language that's sort of heavy use modern-wise is going to have 0-based indexes. Okay, so 0 is going to access the first value. So if I run this code, so I do deno run, because this is a TypeScript file, array args.ts. Okay, see, we console log the array and I get the full array, but then when I console log the 0 index, I get the first item, and I can again log 2, 3, 4, any index, and get the value. So that's all an array is. An array is just a list of values, and I can access the value based on its index. Okay, so that's sort of the main takeaway with arrays right now. We're going to get deeper into arrays in later videos, probably in the next video, but in this video I really just want to show you how to access the values in an array, because that's how we're going to access arguments to our program. Now, what's an argument? An argument is just data that's passed in, sometimes to an individual function, in this case to our script here. So first, let's see how this works in Node. So I'm going to go to JavaScript, and again, JavaScript, we're running with Node. And the way Node works is that every time you run a script, that script is a process running on your computer. So the way a computer works is that you oftentimes have many different things happening at the same time on your computer. They're not necessarily at the same time. It's depending on how your computer's set up. But really, there's many different chains of commands that are running, and each one's called a process. And the computer's constantly saying, okay, let me do a little bit of this process, do a little bit of this process, and just kind of bouncing between all these processes and processing them. Okay, so if you're using Bash, I can actually see a list of all my processes. If I remember right, I think it's just PS. And see, I can see I have these 2 processes. Okay, and this PID stands for process ID. So right now, the fact that I'm running the Bash terminal is a process, and then the fact that I have PS, meaning the command I just ran, PS, is a process. This is specifically what processes are running in this particular terminal, not my whole computer. I'm forgetting the exact command for that at the moment. I remember it's something not intuitive, but that's that. So what's going to happen is that when you run your code, Deno and Node are going to be able to pass you information about the process that is currently running on the computer. In Node, you access it through this object that always exists called process. Where did it come from? Node provides it for you. So that means this only will work if you're running the script with Node, not Deno. Okay? But inside this process object, there's an array called argv. Process.arg. It's VS Code. Process.argv. And what process.argv means an arguments vector. A vector is another word people will use for like arrays. No need to think too hard about it. Okay, so let's just see that at work. So let's see console.log process.argv here. Okay, and let's run this code with Node. So Node array args.js. Now an argument to our script, an argument to the process will be anything we put after the command. So node array args.js. So if I were to put like cheese, Gouda, 5, so literally anytime I hit space and put some text, that's another, like something I'm giving my program so we can use it. So watch what happens when I run the program. See, it logs this argument vector. The first two things are always going to be not set up by you. This is just like the folder of where node is, and then the folder of where the file you're running is. Okay, so that's what those first two arguments, if you need them. Not often will you really need these two variables unless you're doing something really advanced. But all our variables will be the after that. So they'll be like index 2, 3, 4, 5, going for anything after the first two indexes. Because 0 and 1 will always be these two things. Okay, so now what I can do is I can do something like this. I can be like, if, process.arg, then again, our first argument will be the third item in the index, which is index 2. I can say, hey, if it equals cheese, you have given me cheese. Console.log, you have given me cheese. Cool. Now if I run the program, so again, the first argument is cheese. You have given me cheese. Now let's see if I do something that's not cheese. So I do bread. So I pass bread as an argument to the script. I get, see, nothing gets printed out because this is not true. It's not cheese. Okay, so cool. And the reason why I want to do this is because this way you can try to create like something interesting as like for practice. Okay. So for example, let's say I wanted to create a script that adds two numbers. Okay. What I could do is I'll comment all this out. Okay. I will just say console.log the result of process.arg v2, which again would be the first argument, because again, our arguments don't start till the third item in node, plus process.arg v3. So let's see if that works. We might have to edit it, but we'll try it out first. So there's our script, and I'll give it two numbers. So we'll say 2 and 5. See, now it gave me 2 plus 5 is not 25. Now, why did it do that? Because arguments are always going to be strings. So even though I gave it the numbers of 2 and 5, it doesn't, the terminal doesn't know that that's what I meant. It just thinks this is text. So it's going to give it back as 2 and 5. So there's a function in JavaScript called parseInt. And I can use this to take these strings and turn them into numbers. So I'll pass both of these to parseInt. So that way it takes these strings and turns them into numbers. And now if I do that same thing again, see, I get back 7. And now I have a script I can run and then just change the numbers like 10, 10. Okay, and I can create utility scripts like this. Like maybe I need to do my budget every month. Okay, and I don't want to have to like do it myself. I can create a script where I can maybe just give it the amount of income I have for that month, and it'll, based on math that I've given it, it'll then return to me in console log my budget for the month. And I just can run the script. So already you can kind of make really interesting, useful things using Node and Deno just based on what we know so far. You can just make simple scripts that you can use for your own personal utility. Just say, hey, you know what? I need to calculate this every month. Write a script. I can just pass that number as an argument or pass that information as an argument and then have the script do the thing for me and then console log the result. Okay, so because the idea is at this point I want to show you how you can already practically use what you learned in JavaScript to do things that might be useful to you. Create little scripts that you can run for prop purposes. You give it an argument and it gives you a result. Okay, and in Deno, so if I'm using a Typscript file and I want to run it with Deno and do the same result, it's not process.arg. Instead, it's going to be Deno.args. But again, Visual Studio can sometimes be not helpful in trying to correct you. .args. Okay, so let's first console log that so we can see what we get. Deno.args. Okay, it says it cannot find it, but it exists. It's just VS Code doesn't always know what's going on. This is where like the times where like error lens is not helpful. Okay, so if I type in Deno, because it doesn't know I intend on running this with Deno. It thinks right now I'm working in Node because it doesn't always know the flip between the two. Okay, so I'm going to run the file. So I'm going to say deno array.r. Well, deno run. Let me get rid of that text I just added here by accident. Deno where do I go? Here we go. Deno or run, because again it's deno run array args dot ts, and then after that I can include my arguments. So let's just do again cheese, bread, hello. Okay, and you can see here when Deno runs, the argument variable doesn't have those other things in there. It doesn't have like those file paths. It's just the arguments. Okay, so that I like. I don't have to worry about these like first two things that are kind of like there. Okay, so there the first argument is the first thing in the array. The second argument is the second thing in the array. So if I wanted to create the same thing, you know, something that's going to return to me the results of an addition and a subtraction, I could just do this, console.log result of the, oh, I gotta put that in quotation marks, result of the addition. Again, you want to make your output nice so that way the programs feel more useful. Console.log, and then again you're still going to want to parse int though. Okay, so I want to parse int deno.args 0, the first argument, plus deno.args 1, the second argument. Okay, but again, I want to VS Code parse int. So again, I'm taking the first argument, turning it into a number, taking the second argument, turning it into a number. And again, because you always work from the inside out. So the first thing that's going to get evaluated is this, which is going to get me back the thing from arguments. Then we evaluate the parse ints, which is going to take that string and turn it into a number, and then we evaluate the console.log. So the console.log is going to be the last thing to be evaluated. Again, always from the inside out when you're reading the code. Okay, so again, first we do this, then we do this, then we do this. Okay, and that's going to do the same thing. So now if I do deno run, but instead of give it two numbers, we'll say 5 and 6. So deno run, because anything after the command is going to be arguments being passed to the script. And see, it gives me back 11. Okay, and see, I put that little console log, makes the output nice and pretty. Okay, and now again, you're creating something useful. Okay, so now you have the ability to create nice, useful scripts for yourself. Again, you can pass it a string and do some stuff, like let's say, hey, you want to break up a sentence for some reason, or whatever. If you wanted to create something to do some mathematical formula for you, you can now create a script to do that. So you can sit there and say, hey, you know, create a mortgage calculator. Okay, giving these arguments what's going to be the monthly mortgage payment. Okay, and you can just make it as a script that you can run. Okay, and this is the beauty of scripting languages. Scripting languages are languages like JavaScript and Typescript, where I can write the script and just run the file. Okay, and here you're seeing some pretty good examples of how you can use it. So between now and the next video, what I want you to do is write some scripts for yourself. Okay, go write a script that adds two numbers together. Write a script that subtracts two numbers. Write a script that does like things that you might be useful to you. Practice taking arguments and doing things with them. Saying, okay, well, if the argument's this, do that. And then also put some if statements in there saying, okay, hey, if you gave me, you know, if you gave me the number 5, then do this. If you do that. Okay. Like maybe the first argument is like plus equals, or the word plus equals, or plus minus. And then based on the first word, it'll then either subtract or add the next two arguments. Try those out, get familiar with doing that, and you know, try it in with the process.arg with Node in JavaScript, and then try it with deno.args with TypeScript. And again, the difference is if I use, in this case, this will error out if I try to run this in Node, and this will error if I try to run it in Deno, because they're not familiar with this process. That process object only exists when Node runs the code. This Deno object only exists when Deno runs the code. So here's where you start seeing the differences between using these different run times to run your JavaScript and TypeScript code. Okay. With that, again, go practice. Do that first. Get comfortable with that, and then go on to the next video once you've kind of played around with it and explored a little bit. So I'll see you guys in the next video.